And here we go with engaging policymakers at the state level.
All right, well, welcome everyone. Really appreciate you showing up for this one. As you can see, we're going to be talking about building bridges.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
Well, while we're fixing this, I'm David Forsey. I work at the National Governors Association. Oh, you go ahead. Take it.
There we go. So from federal data breaches to foreign governments phishing political campaigns to malware shutting down city services, our nation is under attack. And so what we really want to express today is you can help. And we really want you to start right in your own community. My name is Maurice Turner. I work as Senior Technologist at the Center for Democracy and Technology based out of Washington, D.C.
And I'm David Forsey, also based in D.C. I work at the National Governors Association, abbreviated NGA, not the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, and not the National Gallery of Art. People get that wrong all the time. And no apostrophe.
So, Center for Democracy and Technology, CDT. We do a lot of things. We work in a lot of issue areas, but most importantly, our focus this year is to really get back to putting democracy ahead when we're talking about some of these technology issues. I came on board to CDT back in February, and my focus is on election cybersecurity and the Privacy Project. My goal is to get out and really touch the local election officials to get them up to speed where they need to be with cybersecurity so that we can have a more secure election infrastructure.
And I work at NGA. We're over 100 years old. We're actually created by statute, but I work in a part of NGA that's a 501c3 nonprofit. So I like to say we are the most nonpartisan, most nonprofit organization in DC, but everything we do focuses outside of DC. We work with governors and their senior officials to help them solve really complicated problems, from Medicaid to workforce development and Homeland Security and Public Safety, which is my division, and I help run our cybersecurity program. So yeah, we can go to the next one.
So this is what we're going to explore. We're going to use elections as a way to give a little bit of a case study on how you all might be able to get involved. So we're going to go over some basics as far as elections go, a little bit of the history. We're going to talk about the state of election security, and then we're going to dig into how you can help and then also how you can impact policy. Elections, right? Everyone is familiar with them, but what you might not know is that it is something that is the responsibility of the states. It is not the federal government that's responsible for elections. That's in the Constitution. That means it's really difficult to change. That means that there are certain responsibilities that are spelled out, and they're pretty clear, but sometimes those responsibilities get a little fuzzy. So we're going to talk about how elections actually are, the election process in the United States works. This is a great photo, great painting actually. It gives you an idea of what elections were like just 100 years ago. So election day used to be a really big payday for folks. Someone could actually earn up to 1/3 of their annual salary just by voting a particular way. That's how valuable voters were back when elections were more open. So the ballots weren't secret. That's something we kind of take for granted today. It was very obvious who you voted for because the parties actually provided literal tickets that had a particular color so that people could see. I've circled a couple of interesting aspects here. As you can see, some people enjoyed their election day a little bit too much. Actually, quite a few people enjoyed their election day too much. You'd think it was a hacker con or something. But we had a couple of major events that we'll get into a little bit later that changed the way that we view elections. Here's the really easy version of how an election works. There are some pre-election activities like voter registration. There are some election day activities that happen where it's voters actually going to their polling location, casting their vote on a ballot. Those ballots are tallied up. And then we have some post-election activities that include reporting about those particular results. Under the covers, as I like to say, this is how complicated the election system is. Because quite frankly, it's multiple systems working together in unidirectional and bidirectional capabilities to make sure that all the information from the time that a person registers to vote to the time that they cast their vote to the time that those results are actually reported up through the states and then to the federal government and then to the public, this is how it all works. You can see this is not a very good blueprint for something being secure. There are actually roles for every level of government when we're talking about systems like this working together.
It's not just a huge attack surface because so many different counties and jurisdictions use different systems, it's really difficult to figure out who has what. It's difficult to figure out what is on your network, either at the national level or at the state, local level.
As I mentioned, we had a couple of really big events that changed the way that we do elections in recent memory. Back in the 2000 election, if you remember, the hanging Chad, we had some controversy over who actually won the election. Was it Al Gore? Was it George Bush? The result of that was going from paper ballots to electronic ballots. That happened because of $3.3 billion that Congress distributed to states through the Help America Vote Act, HAVA. We had another major incident just 2 years ago where there was some interference by some rather fancy-looking bears. They were able to fish John Podesta of the Democratic Party and actually use that as part of a misinformation campaign to help sway some voters. It's up to a matter of opinion as to how effective you think that interference was, but it is not up to a matter of opinion as to whether or not it actually happened. Yes, Russians did in fact interfere with our elections. That resulted in $380 million being distributed by Congress to the states to help out with security specifically. So, what's the current state? The current state is that we all know that the election systems are vulnerable. We saw it last year at DEF CON. Every machine was hacked. We're going to see it again, just a couple of days. I would be very surprised if there was any machine that will be in the voting village that will not be hacked. I'm betting that it'll probably be all hacked on the first day. But that's important because there's a certain amount of public awareness we need to bring to issues before there is action. We saw action last year. The voting village hosted hackers. They were able to successfully infiltrate the voting machines. And just a short time later, the state of Virginia, Commonwealth of Virginia, decertified their election machines, which is a really big step to be able to say, look, these machines are so insecure, we're not willing to risk the integrity of our elections on these machines. Now, the other side of it is, if researchers are out there and they're interested and they're motivated and they want to do the right thing, they have to be careful. We have the DMCA, we have the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, and we also have the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. Those are pieces of legislation that make it very risky for people to do this kind of research, to hack in and find the vulnerabilities in these machines. So, part of what CDT is working on, but it's something to keep in mind because Department of Homeland Security has designated election infrastructure as critical infrastructure. That means that there is extra attention, which means please do not go out hacking election systems. We're going to tell you and show you how vulnerable they are. But you could end up in jail. So what we can do is find the right way to do it. So we would like to ask for your help to get involved, to have an impact on this.
One point I just want to make on the critical infrastructure designation, it doesn't give any authority to DHS to do anything they couldn't do before. It is just a matter of allowing them to prioritize resources, okay? So if anyone tells you that the critical infrastructure designation gives the federal government more authority, it's not true. Okay, just wanted to say that. How many people, when they think about information security or cybersecurity, think of their state government? Nobody, right? No. It's always about the feds when we think about government and cybersecurity. But we are here to tell you that state cybersecurity is actually super interesting and super important, and there's a lot of stuff going on because they are the keystone of cybersecurity. So number one, they are the consequence managers. If anything happens, whether it's elections, any other aspect of critical infrastructure, whether it's a normal crime, a normal victim of cybercrime, the actual response is manifested physically every time. And the people on the ground are the state and local officials. The other point is states are the connection, the sinew between local stakeholders and the federal government. Local counties, cities, mayors, they don't deal that frequently with a lot of the federal agencies, whether it's FBI or DHS or DNI, really. And so they know their state partners pretty well, and states provide a really excellent conduit for sending information from companies up to the feds and from the feds down to local stakeholders. And the other point to remember is that states do a lot more than just run elections. So states, not the feds, regulate the distribution of electricity across the country. States regulate insurers that are now coming up with cyber liability policies. We've heard a lot about workforce problems today. States set standards for education if you're interested in expanding computer science. The list goes on and on and on. Don't forget, states have an enormous wealth of PII. Some say more than the federal government. I don't know if that's true, but it's a good talking point. So it's not just elections. States have a lot of different roles in cybersecurity. No, next slide. So that's why we have a cybersecurity program. What we do is we work with chief information officers in every state, chief information security officers in every state. Every governor has a Homeland Security advisor. We work with them. We work with the public safety directors. We work with the chief emergency managers. We work with the state legislators. And we help them do a few different things. Number one, every state has a chief information officer or chief information security officer. They're just like you. Bona fide nerds. They know what they're talking about. Their problem is, in a lot of states, it's not a centralized enterprise security program, right? So even if they're the state chief information officer, in California, there are 140 different agencies, and they don't necessarily have to follow the security controls that are established by a centralized office, right? So we help them think through how can they bring more states into those programs. It's not always through law. Sometimes it's through policy. Sometimes it's through some sort of incentive. So that's kind of one of the things we do. The other big pillar of effort for us is every state is realizing that they have an obligation when it comes to cybersecurity, and this is why I think cybersecurity is actually a good term, even if you hate it. It's not just about data security. They have an obligation to protect the entire state, all the citizens, from the consequences of a defunct information security world. So they protect people from fires, they protect people from hurricanes, they respond to murder. Why wouldn't they do the same in cybersecurity? But obviously, it's quite a challenge to bring in a lot of the private sector, a lot of the other stakeholders to actually come up with statewide cybersecurity programs. So we help them think through that with strategy. And that's why it's one of the reasons I'm here. I am not an information security expert. I'm a lawyer who doesn't practice law, who loves the information security community. I came here last year and it was amazing. Love learning from you people. And a lot of our state officials come to us with questions that I can't answer, but you can. A lot of questions about risk modeling, a lot of questions about best practices and awareness training. And so we want to figure out how we can bring you and our state officials together and overcome some of the mistrust that has, unfortunately, but truthfully, arisen over the past 20, 30 years. So I want to note, in 2018, there will be at least 18, in 2019, there will be at least 18 new governors across the country. At least 18 because they're term limited or they're not running. There are 39 governors who are up. So maybe 25, maybe 30 new governors. That's a huge opportunity when it comes to coming up with innovative initiatives to bring the public and the private sector and you all together. But it's also brings a lot of risks because a lot of the people who are champions for cybersecurity in your states might be leaving. So I just want to really push that button. And also the secretaries of state, who in many states run elections, a lot of them, I think it's 24, are up for election too. So the next couple of years are going to be a huge opportunity to really think creatively and brainstorm about how I Am The Cavalry and other groups can work better with state officials to raise the boat for everybody.
All right, now we're getting into the participation part of the presentation. So I want you to put your hats on and get ready to raise your hands, speak up. So what do you think are some of the threats to our election systems?
Voter suppression.
Okay, voter suppression. Trust.
Influence campaigns.
Influence campaigns, all right.
Influence voters.
All right, so it's trying to change some votes through influence, okay. Any sort of like big buckets or categories that we might be able to put these into?
Central tallies.
Central tallies, okay.
Port scanning.
Port scanning, all right.
Millennials don't care.
I wasn't expecting that one.
Generations don't care.
Stalin said a very
just walk
important
away
thing.
if nobody cares. No, but I think people care. So let's.
If I may, Stalin said something very important that was kind of interesting that may be related to this.
There we go.
Stalin said that the voters don't matter. The people who count the votes matter. So if we're talking cybersecurity and cyber-related stuff with this, these systems count the votes. So if they're vulnerable, our entire system could be thrown on its ear.
Great, I love that.
Let's give him a Wookiee button right there.
So we're going to step through this. We've got three big buckets. First being misinformation. So the idea that Some adversaries might use fake social media accounts to push out messages like, election day has been changed to Wednesday, or all you have to do is call, such and such number to put in your vote, or just retweet your favorite candidate because that'll count. Please don't do that. We actually need you to vote in the ways that are legal in your jurisdiction. This isn't like some other, polling contest or TV show. Another big bucket, disruption. So the idea there is that you don't necessarily need to get into the election systems themselves to cause an impact. You can have long lines. There can be names missing off of the voter rolls, or there can be broken machines, right? So we're not talking about actually changing the votes, just making it a little bit more difficult, a little bit more discouraging to the voters.
And remember, when it comes to disruption, interdependencies. So it's not just the election infrastructure, right? Remember San Francisco MTA? What if you do that on election day, right? So that's another way to disrupt without actually targeting election or voting systems.
Very good point. And then you get to what I'd call the holy grail, actually changing votes, right? So the idea that you can change the winner, or you can be a little more devilish about it. Maybe you just want to target a close race, and you want to change it so that you stretch that margin of victory just enough so that people aren't so suspect and they don't do the recount or they don't do the audit. Audits will be coming up soon, so keep that in mind. This is where we get to have some fun. So, who do you think would want to interfere with elections?
Everyone.
Oh,
Everyone?
we should have put that up there.
We'll just skip the next slides. Everyone wants to interfere. Okay, who doesn't want to interfere with elections? Maybe we could start with this short list. No, who are some of the people or some of the types of people that would want to or would benefit from interfering with elections? Candidates, losers.
Supporters of the losers.
Okay, supporters of the losers.
Should put that up there.
If you're going to win, you don't need to.
Billionaires.
Billionaires, okay. That's I like.
They're a lot more creative than we are.
Yeah. Who else would want to influence an election? There we go. So we're getting there. Foreign actors, right? It's happened before. The U.S. has done it. It seems to be an adversary we can count on.
Your question is who wants to illegally?
We're not going to talk about what's legal or not.
Yes, illegal interference is what we're talking about.
Organized criminal groups. Right, so those are some folks who make some money off of what things are legal and what things are not legal. Maybe there's a particular water bond out there. Maybe there's a big contract that that a particular candidate would be in favor of or not in favor of. Pranksters. You all wouldn't know any pranksters, would you? They might just think it's fun. There you go. Political activists, right? You have some folks who are looking to make a point. Maybe instead of organizing a rally, they organize a DDoS attack. As a way to prove their point. And then you just have this wild card, the unintentional disruptors, the folks who are just going after the vulnerable hardware. They don't know what's on the other end of it. It could be whatever. It could be a company. It could be a hospital. It could be an election system. They might just be out there looking for something vulnerable. And when they find it, they're going to go attack it. There's actually been cases of that. There's one in Alaska where someone was just looking for a particular piece of hardware in a particular software configuration. So these are the folks that election officials and other officials are on the lookout for. But let's remember, it's going to be one, some, or all of these folks. If we just get stuck on focusing on how do we keep Russia out of our elections, we are going to miss the boat. We're going to miss the big picture. Okay.
More just to add fuel to the fire.
Please.
While not directly intending to disrupt the confidence of the public or the election coverage, the Mirai botnet that took out the internet in the Eastern Seaboard for half a day on a Friday took out CNN.com and some other news outlets. So the inability to get information to the electorate is a really, really easy and repeatable target.
Yeah, we have this peculiar need in this country and a lot of countries. I don't understand it. We have to have the results like now. Right, within the next 24 hours. That would certainly mitigate that problem.
Yeah, it is a big concern because when accurate, timely information is not available, there seems to be this void and this insatiable urge to fill it with commentary and opinion and misinformation, disinformation, fake news that will fill it and then spread like wildfire. So then the workload doubles and triples when you try to fight those rumors with actual facts. But sometimes people just don't want to hear that. No, we might have to just wait until we get more information. So how can you help? The country has a rich history of volunteerism, but maybe there's another way that some other folks can volunteer.
Yeah, so just want to emphasize, it's been covered a little bit today, but it is hard to underscore just how badly the workforce shortage hits states and localities. I can tell you for a fact that there are thousands of counties, or I don't want to say thousands, there are many counties in this country whose entire IT infrastructure runs off a single laptop that might be running Windows XP. And the town or county manager does everything for that county, right? Imagine what happens if Sam hits them, right? And the same thing extends to state government. They're generally more prepared, but a lot of times they've got open billets they can't fill, or those who are hired, it's an analyst and they have to do 12 other things. So they really, really need a lot of help. And because they're constantly fighting fires everywhere, they don't get the time to go to conferences like this. They don't get the time to really stay up to date with what's cutting edge. And then finally, no matter how much preparation everyone is doing right now, we are not ready for a high consequence disruption. I can tell you this, that a lot of the major questions have not been answered, and the manpower is not there to mount a serious statewide or nationwide response. So we can go to the next slide. I want to talk about a few examples for how states are trying to engage volunteers. So the first one is what I believe to be the first public vulnerability disclosure policy issued by a state. Big shout out to Am The Cavalry and Katie Mazuris for helping us on this. Couldn't have done it without them. I just want to tell you, I'm just going to give you a quick overview of what it actually, the purpose and the scope. So it's to provide visitors to State of Delaware websites a way to report potential security vulnerabilities. And the scope, policy does not provide any third-party right of action or create any third-party beneficiary, blah, blah, blah. Here's what it authorizes. Any public-facing website owned, operated, or controlled by the State of Delaware, including web applications hosted on these sites. What it doesn't authorize is network DDoS testing, physical social engineering, or any other non-technical vulnerability, brute forcing a login page with any conceivable method, infrastructure vulnerabilities like DNS issues, server configurations, clickjacking, active scanning or automated tools, and LDAP injection. I don't know what LDAP injection is, but as you can see, this was a well thought out VDP, and this is a way to get involved. Help your states identify their vulnerabilities, report them if you can, reach out. In a lot of states, it's just done ad hoc, people reaching out to the state CISO, but in a lot of states, they don't really have instructions. So, read this, come tell me what's wrong with it so I can help Delaware improve it if something's amiss, and we would really love to see more states do this. The California CIO, Peter Liebert, has something he calls the California GovOps Civic Advisory Council, where he brings people, experts from the private sector, into an advisory council to advise him on very basic aspects of information security and very sophisticated aspects of information security. A lot of other states have things like this. If you're interested in learning more about your state, please reach out to me, let me know, and I can put you in touch with the right people. The Michigan Civilian Cyber Corps and Wisconsin Cyber Response Teams are somewhat similar. The Wisconsin version was based on the Michigan version. This has been enshrined in law now. You volunteer your time. Your boss sends Michigan a letter that says, I authorize my employee, or if you're independently employed, you'd be the boss. I authorize them to spend at least 10 days a year on training and going to conferences and such. And if something bad happens, the governor does not need to declare an emergency response. But if something bad happens, you become activated as a state employee and you get immunity from civil liability if you do something wrong. So it's supposed to be kind of a statewide firefighter force. And the Wisconsin cyber response teams are very similar. They have 3 right now. They're looking to build 6. Right now, the cyber response teams draw from state and local government only, but they're looking to expand. So these are just a few of the examples nationwide of how, and some of the models that we can explore together to figure out, well, how do these work? How do they not work? Are they attractive to you? If they're not attractive to you, how could we change them? So, one of the reasons I'm here is to seek input from you, because in many cases, you're going to know what kind of incentives states could provide you to get some of your help into state agencies. I did a survey of a bunch of state CIOs and CISOs before this conference to ask them, how do they think about engaging with volunteers and hackers and security researchers? And the most common elements were they're very interested in doing it, but background checks are generally going to be a must. Highly regulated data is probably going to be not allowed for obvious reasons, things like HIPAA and other PII. But most states don't have active programs on this stuff. When I said that what I just said was just a tip of the iceberg, that's a tip of the iceberg of what states are doing generally, engaging with the private sector. But when it comes to actually engaging with security researchers and hackers, that's pretty much it. So the interest is there, and we'd really love to talk more about how to expand these kinds of programs.
All right, now we're going to jump back into what I think is probably going to be the most fun part of the presentation. And we're going to ask you to think like an adversary and also think like a defender. So we have a couple of scenarios we're going to run through, 3 of them as a matter of fact, and this is the first one. So just imagine for a moment that we're going to talk about that pre-election activity. This is an online voter registration database run at the state level that connects to all of the counties. So it collects the information from the voters and then sends it down to the counties, so that way when the voter shows up at the polling place on election day, their name is in there and they can actually go vote. So putting on your black hat, how would you attack this? Okay, got DDoS.
Slightly modify certain pieces of information so people go to check in and can, but it doesn't look accurate. It's just looking
Right, so you're just switching up some data in the table there, so it's nothing too obvious.
That's a web page, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Why don't I just take the source code? I would just manipulate it and just redirect everyone to somewhere else. That's a phishing scam.
Ooh, that'd be a good one. So maybe you register a lookalike domain, and people can't tell the difference, and you're just stealing a bunch of the good data.
Is my mission to try and keep certain people from voting, keep everybody from voting, or get some people who don't exist to vote?
That's on you.
Yes.
I can do all of them.
That's on you. Yeah.
It depends on which one of those actors you closely identify with, and who's paying you. Right? Did we have any other examples of thinking like an adversary? How would you attack this website?
I have a whole bunch of data on the dark web. Find people on that location on a spreadsheet. You get the social security numbers, you get everything you need, and then turn around and start putting in for absentee ballots.
Oh, yeah.
And you could have the absentee ballots go to a location you want, and then vote.
I like that. So taking advantage of
Pretty good.
some data from existing breaches and then putting that in the registration database and getting those ballots mailed directly to you, right?
Or it's some location, yeah.
Or some location,
Either people are not voting, or you can vote for them. Take your pick.
right?
Find a company who's hosting the voting records and go after that company, because they're probably hosting voting records for that state and probably 3 or 4 other states, and they probably have a backup someplace else in the country, and you need to focus on perhaps that organization as opposed to the state government who may not have these files, but they VPN it out to this company.
Okay, so go after the vendor that's actually hosting this. Maybe they're a vendor for other states as well, so you can get to the
Like
database.
lateral movement. You can get the data from here. You can just jump ping, get other data from other systems.
All right, I like it.
Conversely, you don't have to go up to the webpage, go after this system's interface to the government. Either transit or just replace it with that.
All right, I will add a little bit of reality to this. So, state of Illinois was one of the folks that was actually hacked, and I use the term hacked literally, not just scanned, but actually hacked. They were infiltrated in 2016. There was a SQL injection, and their website was vulnerable, and there were lots of records that were pulled out, anywhere from 80,000 according to the state to 500,000 according to the Mueller indictment that was made public a few weeks ago. So this is not just a pie in the sky scenario that we thought of. This is something that actually happened. Now we're going to switch gears. Think like a defender. So we heard all these wonderful examples of how you'd break it. How do you think you might put your skills to good use to help defend a website like this and harden up the security? What? Can you repeat that, please?
Implement the OWASP top 10.
Implement the OWASP top 10.
OWASP top 10.
Okay, what is OWASP?
OWASP is basically a site that provides the top vulnerabilities of a website. So it'll go through how to protect against an SQL injection. It'll go through how to add HSTS to the website so that it's only using SSL. Those are just a couple that I can think of off the top of my head. But the top 10 are the top 10 vulnerabilities that they find occur on all websites throughout everywhere, and that they provide recommendations on how to fix them.
All right, so staying up to date on the current vulnerabilities and mitigations. How else did you help defend this? There you go. How about we hire someone who actually breaks in for good and provides some sort of report out, right?
Well, I guess related to that, in the design of the site to begin with, make sure there's security people doing this threat modeling and figuring out how you can secure the design so you don't have to fix it yet.
Secure DevOps.
Wow.
Boom.
Security by design. You mean bolted on security isn't the best way to do it?
Yeah, kind of on that same level. Reduce or eliminate any sort of script code you have to run on the site. The more static, plain HTML content, the less likely you have to be exposed.
Okay, so static code instead of scripted code?
People just don't have a website, just go back to paper.
That
It's draconian, it works.
that would work.
We're having a discussion today.
It'd be a lot harder for a lot of people to register how to vote.
Yeah.
But the counterpoint is that's what happened in the 80s and the 70s.
Well, yeah, the 80s and the 70s had some issues, though, right?
Are there any folks from the 70s or the 80s who are of voting age that would shed some light on this discussion? So it's going to be kind of hard to turn back the clock on online voter registration. We have it in, I believe, 37 states plus the District of Columbia, and it's definitely getting more popular because it is encouraging more people to vote. Which, let's take a step back. The whole goal of this is to get people to participate in government. So generally, the more we can reduce the barriers while making it safe, the more that we should focus on that. Any other ideas about how to think like a defender?
Well, monitor who is trying to hack in, because it's now, since it is critical infrastructure, DHS does have resources to help with. So if you could catch them out, you can go after the perpetrators.
Wow, I like this. We should actually log what's going on and review those logs for anomalous activity. Let's keep that in mind, right? Next scenario. So we're going to talk about election or close to election day activities. This is what a warehouse full of election machines looks like. DREs, direct record electronic voting machines. So imagine your job is to do a logic and accuracy test. Do you really want to go walk up to each one of those machines, or would you rather grab your trusty Windows 7 laptop, fire up the Wi-Fi, and do it all wirelessly from one location? If you're an adversary, given this scenario, how would you attack this? Right, so Wi-Fi is probably not the most secure thing.
Depends on what vulnerability, depends on how much effort the blue team put into this.
What blue team? I just see a warehouse full of DREs.
The next sentence, so that's why I figured that.
How else, given this scenario, would you devise to get into those machines and maybe do something a little nefarious? All right, explain that one a little more. Pretend to be a machine.
Yeah, so you could, as an attacker, you could imitate like you are one of the machines, getting that configuration update and the voter rolls and all that sort of information. Then you can have a complete copy, or if it's a firmware upgrade, now you have a whole copy of the firmware.
All right, so you're doing a little intelligence work there. You're gathering up some data, some configuration files. Maybe you want to save that away for the next election, since we do tend to have elections quite often in the U.S. And you had another idea?
There.
All right, so just go for the straight analog attack. Just break down a door and start stealing stuff or breaking it.
But these are under lock and key, under guard. How are you going to get in there?
Oh. No, don't scare people. We want you to volunteer for good.
So the insider threat.
Any other ideas about how you might want to get into these machines that are got their Wi-Fi access points running?
If the manufacturer of the company, then pay off a low-level employee who has access to firmware and inject and update. So whatever factor you want to put in for injecting the supply chain attack, most likely you make China or Taiwan. They have very low AD people compared to the United States, so it's easy to hire injector.
All right, so just go up the supply chain and attack from there, and have them ship with some vulnerabilities you can exploit later.
So maybe this is a minority perspective, but as an adversary, I wouldn't target the individual machines. It's the most high risk physically. It's the most high risk for evidence if I didn't want to get caught, right? When there's a smoking gun, it's much easier to foment, a public response and outcry. There's much easier software targets that are plausibly deniable, easier to perpetrate, higher scale, especially because there's such a, pardon the term, but such a biodiversity of these makes and models that you can't really hit that many at a time. It's so, partly because of lack of organization, it's just so fragmented. You can only do a little bit in a couple districts at a time, even if you could do a class break. So to me, it's the riskiest attack surface as an adversary in the whole system.
So it's high risk, low reward, relatively easier to detect.
And the one part I will completely contradict myself is if my goal was to plant a seed of doubt, then I only have to spoil one. So if I was trying to get the outcome I wanted, I would not target them. But if I was trying to create chaos or crisis of confidence, I would.
Stole the words out of my mouth. I was about to push back, but...
Yeah, so right back to the idea of, all right, who are the actors and what are their motivations when we're talking about why they would want to attack, and this notion that there's quite a diversity of machines configurations out there, so it might be a little difficult to actually change the outcome of the election, but if you're looking to sow some seeds of doubt, this might not be a bad place. And then also, I'll add this a little bit, wouldn't this be a great way to plant a false flag? The super obvious smoking gun, who would be so stupid as to try to attack a machine and then leave a bunch of evidence on it? Don't they know that's not the way to change an election? But it'd be a really good way to try to blame it on someone else. All right, last one.
Picking up a little bit on what Josh said, fundamentally, if you want scale, the internet gives you scale and Twitter gives you the scale. So you can definitely engage in misinformation programs. So for those of you who want to do a little bit of a homework assignment, look up September 11. No, not that one. September 11, 2014. And the good people in St. Mary Parish, Louisiana, who were the subject of a highly coordinated, multiple mode social engineering attack that told them that a chemical plant in their community had blown up and there was a chemical cloud over the whole place. All of this was false, but this was in 2014. The kicker is that the organization responsible for this highly coordinated attack, we may have heard of recently. They're called the Internet Research Agency.
Oh, that's a good sneak peek into 2 slides ahead. So we're gonna think like a defender on this scenario, and then we'll get to another interesting scenario too. So we've heard about how you can attack these machines. What are some ways you might want to defend and improve the security around these machines that need to be uploaded? They need to be tested before they go out on election day.
And using paper ballots is not an answer here, because we know someone's going to say it.
So they're totally secure as is? There's nothing else we can do? Okay, there we go.
Hardware roots of trust.
Hardware roots of trust.
For attestation of the current running software and hopefully for verification of
Bill of materials.
that could be part of it.
All right. How else can we help defend these machines against adversaries?
You said it, but you should have a software bill of materials, so at least know what you have, know what vulnerabilities are in there. But then also the OWASP that was mentioned before, do an application security audit on what can be done and what people said before. And the other one, try breaking in, see what you can do. All the lists we did on the other day, the other two ago.
All right.
One that can open up a can of worms. This is uploading the DRE configuration, correct?
Yes.
How feasible would it be if the configuration information? Hey, thanks. If the configuration information is made publicly available, that is, here it is. Here's the configuration. Here it is, black and white. We're going to put this on all the machines. And if this is, if this configuration is not being uploaded to configure the machine, of course, something is tampered with.
I don't think I understand the question.
So there's some one way to
make
validate,
it open source. Like it's kind of like an open source model.
So how about if I meet you in the middle and how about we publish a hash of the configuration?
Yep.
Before it's loaded on there, and then that hash is made available publicly, and then after the election, the machines are also available, and the hash can be pulled off of there, so we can do a little matching. Okay. All right, so let's use some existing material and not try to reinvent the wheel. We'll just follow some basic CIS controls.
You're referring to Center for Internet Security?
What's that?
Are you referring to the Center for Internet Security?
Yeah, CIS, sorry. CIS hardening guidelines, they have them for both servers in Linux and in Windows. So if you use those to harden the systems, it will go through a nice little, you could probably even do it with a GPO if you had the system to put it up. And it would run through on all of these systems if you wanted to use it that way. Or like you said, create a golden image and hash that image so that you could verify what happened before and after. However, my thought on the hash is that most of these systems store data, so most likely your hash has changed. And how do you reconcile your basic hash to what's happened after all of the voting has taken place? Because that hash has changed because you now have new data.
Yeah, these systems are complex, but I think I like your idea of hardening them up. So let's move on to our last scenario and make sure we leave enough time for Q&A. So here we are. It's election night. It's after the polls have closed. We had a little bit of IT help. We had a very smart engineer who came up with an idea of, let's go ahead and self-host the website that displays the public results. And then we're going to auto-tweet those results every 15 minutes. So that way people can get off our back and we can hopefully get the results out without the website crashing. So put on that adversarial hat again. How do you think you might want to attack this, either by going through the website itself or maybe social media? So there we go. We have a little bit of disinformation, posting some inaccurate results. If you notice, I circled a couple of numbers there. Those results don't match up. What do you think the response would be by the public and the media if the results on the web page don't match the results on the Twitter feed? You know, social media is always right, but then again, everything on the internet is always right. So we're in a bit of a conflict. What are some other ways you might want to attack this scenario?
What about simultaneously defacing a major news website to correspond with the manipulated data?
There you go. So a little bit of coordination with major media outlet. Is anyone thinking of two-factor authentication? What happens if that legitimate Twitter account gets out of the control of the officials that are supposed to be posting those results? So then you actually have a scenario where you can have some additional defacement, you can have false information, or maybe you can even have some propaganda going out on the Twitter account. Any other ways that a self-hosted website might be attacked? All right, it seems like we have a lot of defenders on this one. So, how would you defend?
Me.
So make sure you lock down. Now, this is assuming that Twitter is involved, right? Or social media account.
Yep.
Lock down that social media account with two-factor authentication, but we're using a hardware like a YubiKey, not SMS two-factor authentication like Reddit got burned. Lock it down with like a hardware key, like a UB key.
So hardware-based 2FA to really lock down the social media accounts. Anyway, you might want to defend that self-hosted website that's has the results up on it.
I guess some of the methods we described before when it comes to just web application security generally, right?
Yeah, is anyone thinking they might want to offload that to maybe a cloud vendor, someone who might be in the business of security and making sure that their stuff doesn't get hacked compared to?
I would argue inherently there's no difference between just what you put on your website. Don't assume just because you moved it in the cloud it's more secure. Don't assume it's less secure.
Just you need to do all that stuff we've been talking about.
All right, so maybe a little bit
on either one.
Maybe a little due diligence when it comes to configuration and making sure the security is there. So when you're trying to decide between whether to self-host or use a cloud-based provider, that the security is actually implemented and they have protocols in place. So this is, again, this is a conversation we can all have together, but ask yourself, if you haven't volunteered yet, why you haven't. In a lot of cases, it's going to be because you didn't know that the opportunity was there. But, I think it's, I don't know whether I Am The Cavalry came up with this, but the 5 Ps, right? The 5 motivations for hackers. Profit, prestige, pride, what are the other 2? Protectors and puzzlers, right? And a lot of those people are going to have an altruistic reason to help their community, right? These are small businesses in your community that just don't have the resources to protect themselves. It's not their fault, right? These are your municipal agencies that don't have the resources to protect themselves. It's not their fault. And the same thing applies for a lot of states. And obviously, ensuring, when it comes to specifically elections, ensuring the smooth operation of the election process would presumably be the goal of many in this room and many at BSides and DEF CON and Black Hat. It goes without saying that it's at the bedrock of our Republican form of government. We have to have public trust in elections. And then finally, it's a terrific way to build your network of local, state, federal, and InfoSec community members. That's why you're all here. There are a lot of people outside this room who are never going to come here. And so how can you build your network with them? So these are just some of the benefits of volunteering. I'd love to brainstorm with you some more. It's also, in a lot of cases, it's a great opportunity for free training. So if you join the Michigan Civilian Cyber Corps, they give you free training. A lot of you might think you don't need training, but a lot of you might. So that's yet another benefit. So do you want to take this one? Yeah, so next steps for this group. So we're thinking of, if you're out there in the crowd now and you're excited, you're motivated, what can you do? Well, it's simple. You can reach out to your local officials. Election day is a perfect time, is a perfect event around which you can do that outreach. You can learn about how elections are run. There are plenty of municipal services that happen that you don't necessarily get insight to. It's like you wouldn't necessarily go up and say like, hey, I'm super excited to learn how trash is collected. Or please tell me how the sewers work. That's really gross. I have some stories about that because I used to work in a city where that was in my department. It's exciting for me because I think it's great when we have well-functioning infrastructure. But I think elections are one of those things where, if you're over 18 and you're a citizen, like you have a voice. That's the way you do it. So learn how that process works. And quite frankly, be upfront about what you can do. Election day is full of opportunity to learn some new skills. Some of them aren't very exciting. You might just be checking names off of a list, but you might also be able to do a little bit of troubleshooting with the machines. Maybe there's an opportunity to help out before Election Day because you have a certain skill set that these officials are looking for. They might want someone to go around that warehouse of DREs 2 weeks before Election Day and be on the lookout for rogue APs. They might want someone who can go out and help them with security audits after the fact to make sure that nothing was tampered with after the election. So there are opportunities that if you show interest, you show that you have some skills, officials might be open to that help that you're offering. Along those lines, CDT, I have developed a toolkit. So it's a basic overview of what we went over here of the election process. It gives you an idea of some of the roles that traditional volunteers can play in an election. It also gives you an idea of some of the roles that you can play in an election as a technical volunteer, sets some expectations about how volunteers are vetted, and even gets to the very basics of like, here's just a sample email that you can send out to your election officials to show that, hey, look, I'm excited. This is how I can help you out on election day.
Can I also mention another good example of a way you can help is, as we said before, the federal government has released $380 million to all the states and territories to spend, and a lot of them are spending it on election security. Obviously, vendors are coming out of the woodwork. You might work for some of them. A lot of election officials don't know what questions to ask these vendors. They don't know whether they're being sold snake oil. They don't know whether they're legitimate solutions. And some of you have the basic knowledge to provide these election officials with, here's what you should be asking vendors who are saying they can protect you, right? So using things such as the toolkit, you can help them provide that kind of, I mean, the recommendations you came up with for how to defend these websites, a lot of people who work in election offices, they won't even get to there, right? Yeah. So if you can just give them that, we made a huge step forward, right? Because then the secretaries of state and the election directors who manage these systems can go to their CIOs and say, well, this is what I've been told. What do you think? So there's a lot of low-hanging fruit out there.
I'll give you two quick examples of some folks that made a pretty big impact on elections. So last year, Logan Lamb, he was doing some research in the state of Georgia. He decided to poke around the election website and found that he was able to exfiltrate 15 gigabytes worth of data. Thank goodness he was not looking to do anything bad with it. He actually brought it to the attention of the center that runs elections. He got a pretty frosty response. Several months went by. Vulnerabilities were not patched. As a matter of fact, he was even warned by the executive director of the election center, like, if you go public with this, people are going to be very nasty to you and they would, quote, crush you. Eventually, that led to the election center losing the contract to run those elections, but the state of Georgia, specifically the Secretary of State's in a bit of denial about the vulnerabilities, so there's still a lot of work left to go. Mudge, part of the Loft Group, 20 years ago, they testified in front of Congress about just how bad the situation can be if we don't take security more seriously. 20 years later, we're still not taking security as seriously as it needs to, but Democrats reached out to him in 2016. He tried to respond with some policy solutions about how we can make this better. Unfortunately, they were at the level where they weren't even accepting some of his OPSEC recommendations because they thought it was going to be too cumbersome. The downside of that is Trump was elected. His name was floated around as having a larger role in the administration, but unfortunately politics kicked in, and he was seen as trying to help the enemy, which means that a lot of valuable information from the policy perspective was basically being disregarded because of someone's desire to try to help out everyone. So these are just some of a little bit of insight and recognition that there are some things that will happen. Even if you're going out there with good intentions, it's important to recognize that there are larger roles or there are larger things that are going on in play, and that if you can get in on the ground floor, try to work with the locals in the states, you might have a better opportunity to make some of the changes.
And it's also important to emphasize that, you know, a lot of people in government don't understand the people in this room. And it's, I think Josh mentioned this earlier, but it's also really important when you're approaching policymakers to also have a lot of humility when it comes to their requirements, right? So, for instance, in some cases, if you change software on a voting machine, you have to get it recertified. And that is a major process. So it's not very easy to just patch, right? Especially if it's 3 months, 2 months, 30 days before an election. So there are a lot of requirements that we may not understand. And so it's really important to approach these kinds of partnerships in a humble way and not be too self-confident, because this is a pretty self-confident community. I think we can all agree. So anyway.
Yeah, our organizations are here to help. Specifically, I work on the election cybersecurity project at CDT. Like I said, we have the InfoSec toolkit if you're interested in working with election officials. We also have a risk basis report where we've done the research and actually reached out to the community and said, like, hey, what are your concerns when you're trying to do research? And so I think it's a really good way for you to get some insight onto some of the pitfalls that might happen, and so how you can avoid them. And then just to show you how much help election officials specifically need, we're actually developing resources as like 101 level field guides to get information like two-factor authentication, password managers, VPNs out to election officials, because sometimes that's just the level where they're at. They may not even know some of these basic terms that you all take for granted and use every day. So back to that humility, and I'd also interject empathy when it comes to trying to work with with officials in your community. NGA has tons of resources, and they have a very broad reach. They have the ear of the folks that can make the decision. So please, if you don't feel comfortable going directly to your officials, come to us. We can brainstorm. We can try to work and figure out how you all can have an outsized impact on your community.
For example, we will be holding a national summit. I have to stop in a minute, but we'll be holding a national summit, our third national summit on state cybersecurity next summer. I would love to have a panel that's just hackers to talk to all these chief state cabinet officials about what your lives are like, what your priorities are, how you can engage with them. So there are a lot of opportunities for engagement. So please, please, please reach out to me. Probably should have put our emails up here. Anyway, so we actually have to stop. So I guess if people have questions, we can just keep talking, or I don't know if there's a session next, right?
There's a reception in the main lobby lounge.
Dope.
Go talk over beers.
All right, we'll go talk over beers. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you.